Greetings, lovers of lore. Thank you for joining me for the fourth installment of the Streets of New Capenna story as it unfolds. I've really been enjoying this series, and if you're not up to speed, you might want to go back and watch episodes 1 to 3 so that you fully know what's going on with the story, because things are getting crazy in this episode. We're going to be focusing mainly on the larger story with a little bit of the side story mixed in there as well, right? So we're dealing with the eve of the crescendo. This is the massive celebration that the Cabaret family holds every year. However, this year is going to be something special because the Cabaret are making an announcement of the font. And this is something that will radically change the way that New Capenna functions as a society and give a ton of power to the Cabaret. So we start out over in the Maestros Museum. Xander is wandering around very deep in thought, stopping to admire all of the different statues that are there. And Hello, his right-hand man, is there with him. But ultimately, Angelo starts to pick up on some kind of anxiety or something that's being felt by Xander. He can tell something is off, but he doesn't know quite what. Xander, though, isn't having it. Basically tells him, you need to go head on over to the celebration in my place. And Angelo goes, wait a minute, if I go to the celebration in your place, aren't the Cabaret going to see this as a slight, and maybe the other families as well, because the head of this family isn't showing up? And Xander quietly says, you will be the head of the family soon, to the point where Angelo goes, hey, wait, what's going on? And Xander says, forget it, just get on up out of here, because Xander knows that there's something in the air. He can feel it, he can sense it. It's all happening tonight. So he wants to spend the time he can in this maze of memories, this museum that he's created of all these statues from the older days of Capenna and relics of his youth as well that he can no longer remember. His past is a mystery to himself, but he knows something is going to happen tonight. So he sends Angelo out a side door, a little known side door, because he knows that the adversary is about to make his move. And that's actually what happens next in the story. Shadows start to show up in the museum, and Xander turns to them and says, have you come to kill me, adversary? Now, at the same time, you've got Elsbeth, who's working for the Cabaret. If you remember, in the last part of the story, she went to the Cabaret seeking employment and managed to meet the right-hand woman of the leader of the Cabaret, who was named Ginny. Ginny took a liking to Elsbeth and managed to get her a job. So at this point, Elsbeth is actually working as part of the Crescendo celebration. She's working as a waitress on the main floor, basically taking trays of food and drink around to people, right? Now, it's during this event that Ginny walks up to her and asks her to look after this young girl named Giada, just for a few moments while she goes to handle some business, right? So Elsbeth says no problem, takes a look at this girl, is just chatting with her. The little girl seems kind of fearful to a degree, a little bit hesitant to talk, but she's just overall chilling, right? So Elsbeth thinks nothing of it. Ginny comes back, picks up Giada, and off they go together. And Elsbeth notices suddenly that particular maestro individuals from the family seem to be positioning themselves in different locations. Elsbeth knows when something's about to go down, and she can see people getting ready for it. As this is happening, Ginny takes Giada up to the main stage to get everybody's attention. You've got a bunch of Cabaret guards standing around this stage. Giada and Ginny are up there, and they bring this gigantic jug up, which at first people think this must be the font that they were discussing. But it turns out this gigantic jug that they're bringing up is actually empty. So what happens at that point is Ginny makes a grand proclamation, the sort of thing you would say at a grand festivity, welcoming people there and saying that everything is about to change. They promised a big deal and they're going to reveal the font. And at that point, Giada reaches out to the jug, and in a blinding flash of light, the jug is instantaneously filled to the brim with halo, right? We're talking about the most important substance in all of New Capenna, something that's been running out. And up on the stage, this little girl has managed to create an entire jug of halo out of nothing. And obviously, Ginny is beaming and proclaiming, "See the power of the Cabaret. Everything changes tonight. We have an infinite supply of halo. Behold the font." And everybody's going wild, right? All the criminals that are at this party who are there to celebrate are going nuts because obviously this solves a bunch of problems. Whoa, halo for everybody. But I mean, underneath as well, they've got to be scheming, how are we going to get on this? How do we make this ours, right? But Elsbeth at the same time, she's part of this party and she's looking up at the stage with horror because underneath it all, Elsbeth actually resonates with Giada. She sees what she is now. She realizes that Giada is a prisoner of the Cabaret, and the Cabaret will use her up until there is nothing left of her. And it kind of reminds, to a degree, Elsbeth of herself when she was younger, because Elsbeth is from the plane that New Capenna is on, and she herself was a prisoner of the Phyrexians on the plane that New Capenna exists in, right? So it triggers this sort of, I'm not going to let what happened to me happen to you style mentality. Obviously, it's not the exact same sort of scenario, but it triggers a like half maternal, half just, I don't want you to have the same resonant experience as me result in Elsbeth, right? So what happens after this moment of filling the jug full of halo? Obviously the crowd's going wild, but at the same time, a bunch of people start to move forward, tearing off their party-going revelry gear. And it turns out that every single crime family has been successfully infiltrated by the adversary, who we know as Ob Nixilis, right? So Ob Nixilis has taken members of everybody's crew and turned them to his own purposes. So all at once, all these members of different families start pulling off their garb and they go to swarm the stage because they have orders from Ob Nixilis to obtain the font at any cost. So you've got this situation where the stage is being overwhelmed. They're coming at the font. At the same time, Jetmir, the leader of the Cabaret, is being surrounded by a ton of different squad members of the adversary, right? So they're trying to take down the leader of the Cabaret at the same time. So Ginny, basically at this point, is torn between what to do, right? She's like, okay, do I stay here and try and help the font? Do I go and protect Jetmir? But it's not very long before she decides Jetmir's more important. So she basically runs off to try and help Jetmir. This leaves Giada the font essentially alone because all the Cabaret enforcers have been cut down. The adversary's men are closing in on Giada. And that's when Elsbeth springs into action. She pulls that dagger that she got from Xander out of her gear, leaps up onto the stage, basically brains somebody on the back with the dagger, starts laying into them from behind, just knocking them out. The idea is just get out of there as fast as possible. So she knocks as many people as she can down and then basically grab Giada's hand and goes, let's go, right? And just starts running her out of the place, trying to get her out the back door. The story then returns back over to what's going on at the museum with Xander, all right? So Xander is basically being accosted by a number of the adversary's followers. But because Ob Nixilis is a twisted demon, it's not enough to take Xander down. He has to send Xander's own men at him. So the people coming to take Xander down are all previously part of the Maestros family. But unfortunately for them, that actually really works out in Xander's favor. Xander is older, right? But he is still somebody who has demon blood flowing through him, and he is still a crafty individual. So basically what happens is he realizes these are his old people, right? It's like, come at me, bro. So the first one comes running in at him with this dagger, and Xander just does this move and is able to block the dagger, and the assassin from the Maestros who has the dagger is astounded. The look on his face is like, how did you block this magical dagger? And Xander basically just spits in his face. Do you think I was stupid enough to give you a weapon that I wouldn't be able to defend myself against? So that's the scenario. Xander essentially takes out these previous Maestro members by knowing their weakness. I gave you the weaponry. I know how to undo you. It's really, really cool. Xander uses his clever nature to overcome his foes, right? So he takes a few down that way, but at the end of the day, he is still older and using a cane, so he has to use the terrain to his advantage. Since he built the Maestros Museum, right? He is the father of this place. He birthed it. He knows every nook and cranny. So he knows basically where he can go to find the most narrow hallways and things like that, so they can't swarm him and they'll have to face him one by one. So he's slowly picking them off, but he doesn't know how many of them there are. So eventually, basically, he makes his way through the entirety of the museum, lamenting as he's being chased because some of these assassins are blasting magic at him, and giant chunks of marble are being ripped out of the floor. And you have to understand that Xander appreciates beauty, and the marble of his floors come from a quarry that is no longer being used, so his floors are irreplaceable. So even under the threat of losing his life, even fleeing from all these previous associates, his mind is still lamenting the loss of beauty. And I really enjoy that aspect of Xander's character. So he eventually ends up making his way to an open air garden that's up on the top of the Maestros building, right? And he barricades the door so the rest of the soldiers can't get in. And it's a pretty little garden, a nice viewing spot, one of Xander's favorite views, in fact. And he thinks he has some breathing time here to figure out what he's going to do. But unfortunately for him, there's this great flap of wings, and up behind him in the air appears Ob Nixilis. And Ob Nixilis is just full of mirth. He's having his best day. He's basically like, really, bro? Really? You thought that running out onto a balcony was going to save you? Are you for real? It's that kind of a reaction, which I genuinely enjoy, right? And even faced with this demonic planeswalker, even then, Xander is still not cowed. He is still fighting for his existence, right? Ob Nixilis lands on the balcony, and he's basically chatting with Xander, and Xander's chatting with him, and then immediately just launches into this maneuver with his sword and twists, like he basically does this feint where Ob Nixilis thinks he's coming in towards his arm, but then he reverses the flow and drives the blade up directly towards Nixilis's neck, the unprotected area. Now, poor Xander can't really be aware of Ob Nixilis's power, but Nixilis basically just had to point at Xander, and Xander didn't even see it happen, and he's just blasted through the air. Magic tears through his body, and he is flung from the air. Now he is experiencing his favorite view from a very terminal velocity, right? As he collapses down towards the world of Capenna. Pretty intense. Then the story returns back to what's going at the Cabaret Crescendo, right? At this point, the adversaries' men from everybody's family, obviously, they're everywhere. Things are going wild. Elsbeth has managed to escape out the back door with Giada. On the way there, some people got incapacitated, but Elsbeth totally ended a number of people's lives as well. She heard movement behind a curtain, figured out where the guy's center of mass was, and just jammed a dagger into him, took out multiple people, didn't have enough time to hide the bodies before she moved onwards. But Elsbeth moves into serious mode in this part of the story. No longer is she just, I'm not really going to make that much of an impact. People are losing their lives as a result of this, right? So basically what happens is they are making it all the way to the back door or whatever, and the adversary has placed some of his goons there. So the goons are like, yeah, end of the road, ladies, kind of thing, right? So they're coming at them, and then lucky for Elsbeth and Giada, Vivian shows up at that point, because spectral wolves, the kind that get fired through Vivian's arrows, they start to leap on the guys in the alley, just right? So it's like, hey, Vivian, and Vivian's like, hello, happy to help, right? So what happens then is Jetmir and Ginny and some of the cabaret people end up filing out the back. Now, Jetmir is pretty hurting. Ginny looks no worse for wear and sees that Elsbeth has Giada. It's like, oh, thankfully you saved Giada. This is fantastic. Okay, so bring her on over here. And Elspeth's like, I want to keep her safe. And Ginny's like, we are where she'll be safe. And Elspeth's like, I'm going to take her somewhere safe till this all calms down. At which point, Ginny's aspect and demeanor change considerably as she's like, that's not happening. And she starts to head down the alley towards them, right? And that's when Vivian fires a gigantic spirit dragon into the middle of the alley and smiles at Elsbeth, and they all run off with Giada, right? So as they're running away, they're trying to figure out where they're going to take Giada, what they're going to do. Vivian is saying that they need to just dump Giada off somewhere, not really worry about it, because they have much bigger concerns than inter-family like crime battles on one plane of existence. There's far more at stake with the multiverse. And if you want to know what Vivian's talking about, then make sure you check out the earlier installments of the story if you already don't know, I should say, because it ties in all that Phyrexian goodness. They don't talk about it more in this story. It really just boils down to Vivian going, come on, let's not waste our time with this stuff. Elsbeth saying, no, I'm making sure that this girl gets the help she needs. It's basically like Elsbeth like, this is me, Giada is me, and I will help her. Nothing will stop me. And so at this point, Vivian just kind of throws her hands up a bit and says, okay, how about this? If I help you get her settled into somewhere that's safe and secure that you're satisfied with, will you then come with me so we can address what I believe is important, right? And at that point, that's when Elsbeth says, yeah, sure, okay, no problem. We'll do that up, right? And so then that's how they basically move on from that point. Elsbeth is going to head off. She basically needs to find some weaponry to help with this purpose, right? Back over at the Maestros, you've got Nicholas. Now he's down on the ground and he's angry. He's taken his rage out on the lifeless body of Xander. He's basically just mutilated it because he's so enraged over how things have gone, right? Information has come in. There is no font in terms of it's not an item. We weren't able to obtain it. We're not even 100% sure what happened. The details are kind of sketchy because all the people who were inside the event pretty much lost their lives. So getting the information back to Nicholas, it's like not 100%. All he knows is he doesn't have the font. Nicholas's plan at this point was tonight have the font and the heads of all 5 of the different family members of the different crime families of Streets in New Capenna, right? But instead, you've got a situation where only one is done. Nicholas has taken care of Xander himself. The other 4 families still have their heads with no problem, and the font hasn't been acquired. So Nicholas is just raging at these little minions that he's acquired from the families. He basically wants to wipe them out, but he knows that he can't accomplish what he wants to accomplish if he does that. So back to Elsbeth, who has basically gone, okay, no more Mr. Nice Lady. I am now going into battle mode. She specifically says she's no longer going to be hiding her powers and abilities. And I honestly wish that they had full on explained that earlier in the story, because I ran into multiple moments where I found myself frustrated that Elsbeth wasn't exercising her powers without being given sufficient explanation as to why that was. So this retroactively goes back to the beginning and applies the concept of Elsbeth was in stealth mode. And I appreciate having that information because it makes the story more enjoyable. But like I said, no more Mr. Nice Lady. So she needs weaponry. Where's she gonna get weaponry? From the Maestros Museum, right? Xander had promised to give her some sweet gear. So she heads back to the museum, and that's when she basically overhears multiple underlings of the adversary discussing what had happened. So she finds out that Xander's life is over and that basically she's done with the Maestros. She starts kind of groping around in the place for a sword or whatever, and that's pretty much where the main story ends off, with her reaching out for a blade. Now, the side story from this set surrounds Angelo, who is the right-hand man of the Maestros, but it really just is the story of his daughter's wedding and how he's asked to do a criminal favor. He basically has to wipe out one of the Maestro members, and it does have some fun little elements where he rigs up a statue to behead the guy. Like, there's some fun elements to it, but it doesn't really add anything overall, it feels like, to the story of New Capenna. It really just, it does some nice, like, background flavor, but nothing that really ties majorly into the story. There is a cool character who has some magical lights out device, so she can instantly cause darkness in a radius around her and then just mess everybody up inside that. And I mean, the you ask me a favor on the day of my daughter's wedding style, like Godfather stuff, is a fun little tie-in, but ultimately I thought that this side story might have something to do with Xander sending Angelo off through the side door or whatever, but after going through it, it really was just kind of Angelo dotes on his daughter. He wants to have her have a good wedding. There's like his in-laws are essentially like powerful people. It's really, there's not much to it. So if you want to go and check it out yourself, you can. Now, if you haven't already checked out all the new Capenna lore, there's 3 more videos to check out. The Brothers War series, the Brothers War lore, which is like the best story of Magic the Gathering. That series has just had the 4th episode added. So go and check that out. I'll leave the playlist for that up on the screen too. Thanks for coming by, my friends. And remember, lore is life.